Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Cup Duet Reviews, brought to you by Cup of Hemlock Theatre. I will be your host for this episode, Ryan Borochovitz, co-artistic producer here at Cup of Hemlock, and I'm joined today by my other co-artistic producer, Mackenzie Horner. Hi, Mac. How are you doing today?
I'm not feeling too well, Ryan. I'm not feeling too well. I'm feeling as if there's something inside me. Something's coming on, some type of metamorphosis. You know.
Oh my God! Are you going to transform into some sort of ungodly insectant or creature by the end of this review?
Maybe. I'm all wrapped up today because I'm not feeling the greatest.
Okay, well, if you are confused by this gimmick that we have here, today we are going to be talking about the very wonderful piece "Two Weird Tales," which is adapted and performed by Eric Woolfe, based on the literary novellas The Metamorphosis by Franz Kafka and At the Mountains of Madness by H.P. Lovecraft. It is directed by Mairi Babb and presented by Eldritch Theatre at the Red Sandcastle Theatre until June 5th, so try to get your tickets while you still can. And yes, Mac was just showing the program. I have mine too. Can we talk about how fun this program is for a second?
Yeah, this was
before we even get into the piece.
Yeah. I mean,
but before we do what's in your cup, I guess I have to say we can't forget that.
Of course. Mine today is my classic grapefruit tangerine Crystal Light mixed with a little bit of diet ginger ale.
Lovely.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
How about you, sir?
I just have water, but I am drinking it out of the cup with the Cup of Hemlock logo on the back.
Beautiful.
So let's talk about, we will get into this production, and of course we're going to begin with non-spoilers, so there will be a spoiler mark as we go. But yeah, let's just kind of, as a fun entranceway into this, let's talk about this lovely little document they gave us on our way into the theater.
Yes, I mean, I love that I actually got a physical program. Not that I don't love conserving the trees and using the QR code method that so many theater companies do now to save money on printing costs. But I mean, I do love having a piece of paper in my hand that I can flip to and read. And I mean, just the craftsmanship in these, where they took everybody's. Let's see if I can get a good shot of someone. Yeah, you can kind of see where they took everybody's. Yeah, where they kind of took everybody's headshot and they kind of demonized them in some way. You got some that are tentacles. You got our one designer who looks like an evil version of Jigsaw meets
as opposed
Pinocchio.
To the non-evil version of Jigsaw.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a nice version of Jigsaw.
But yes, and then of course we have these bios that are next to these corrupted images of these people, and I kind of, maybe this kind of gets a spoiler zone. I don't necessarily want to read them in detail, but yeah, they are a bit of a trip, and it's certainly, if you are perusing it while getting yourself into the mood for these pieces, I think it does that trick very well. So hats off to whichever member or members of the team was responsible for this fun bit of eldritch horror that kind of, brings us into the world of these plays. Yes. So without getting too spoilery, that comes later, we should probably just talk about these pieces. I don't know if you, usually when you're hosting, you throw it to me to try to briefly sum up the piece without spoilers. Do you want me to throw it to you this time and give that a try? See if
sure.
Yeah.
Sure. I mean, so general thoughts, right? General thoughts and impressions. I mean, this was a very unique piece. I mean, I went in not knowing anything about this piece. I try going into shows, if I can, as much of a blank slate as possible. The only thing I did do was I was like, oh, Metamorphosis. So when Ryan got here, I started to tap his professorial brain and be like, so is this like Ovid's Metamorphosis? And Ryan's like, no, this is the one where Gregor Samson turns into a giant cockroach, as shown here. Which me in my musical theater brain immediately went to the scene from the producers where Max and Leo are hunting for their flop of a piece, and sure enough, Max, one of the treatments Max reads starts with, Gregor Samson awoke one morning to discover he had been turned into a giant cockroach.
And now you know where that's from.
Yes, exactly. Now I know, right? So I appreciated that. And what the hell is going on with my green screen?
Just go with it. It's part of the cosmic horror of these pieces.
Yes, it's Cthulhu. It's Tuckally Lee screwing with my green screen. Anyway, so I went in not knowing a lot about the piece. I kind of just went in going, okay, what is this mystical piece of ours that we're seeing tonight? And I was pleasantly surprised, and I was blown away by, first of all, it's not a big spoiler, but there is sleight of hand magic that is done in this piece, both in Act 1 and Act 2. So that was really fun because, I mean, once again, Rand Sandcastle is a great spot for that type of work because of how intimate that space is.
Yeah.
That you're right there with the performer, who in this piece was Mr. Eric Woolfe. And so that was really neat to be so up close and personal with that. And we'll get more into my thoughts about the magic in the choice of incorporating magical elements like this into the piece. But then we get into the puppets. And oh my goodness, those puppets were stunning. I particularly preferred the ones in Act 1 over Act 2. I will say, like those ones really kind of thematically, I think, fit the piece more. They kind of looked like the old Russian rotten apple head dolls. The
very Punch and Judy kind of flair. Also.
Yes. And I mean, Eric, who manipulated them, really did a great job handling and bouncing between these characters where there wasn't a beat missed in these conversations. I mean, even the most minor characters, like the three tenants who show up, each individual one of them in their grouping had a little bit of a personality. So I mean, I thoroughly enjoyed that, and I mean, it's the first act ends on such a interesting note that I turned around and went, "Really? Is that how this ends?" And Ron's like, "Yep, that's it." And I went, "Okay." And then Act 2, which is the whole new story, the Mountains of Madness. I was expecting more the same with the kind of the Tim Burton-y puppets going on there, and sure enough, it was a totally different way of doing it. Like he was a totally different character altogether. The way he spoke, the way he held himself, he really did kind of become this professor giving a lecture to us, and it felt like a really kind of old school university lecture session. It was great. So I mean, I'll say overall, it was a great piece. I think this is a really kind of fun, unique piece of work that could have gone really badly if handled improperly. This could have been a really bad kind of like devised theater piece. Speaking as one who did devise theater. And so the fact that this is a one-man show, so the fact that Eric held us for 2 hours and we were captivated the whole time, there was not a moment where I was like, oh, is this going to end soon? What's going on? That type of thing. So no, it was really well done. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I highly recommend it. What about you? What are your thoughts?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I'm in a complete agreement about everything you said. I will just say right off the bat, Eric Woolfe is a magnetic performer. And yeah, you've alluded to this and everything you said, but the way he manipulates these puppets, the different voices he puts on, the differentiation between the characters, like I will put him in a league with Ronnie Burkett as a frame of reference for brilliant Canadian puppet masters. Yes. Is that the proper term? Puppet master? I feel like that.
Puppeteer,
yes. Puppet master has a manipulative connotation to it. Puppeteer. And yes, and the magic too. It was all kind of very simple magic tricks. I'm not saying that as a slight, no pun intended. But yeah, there's a lot of sleight of hand, and especially at the Mountains of Madness, there was a lot of card tricks. Yes. And yeah, some of the tricks I would say I know how he did them, others I don't, and like that's half the fun. But you're right, and being at the Red Sandcastle Theatre, he definitely has the intimacy of the space working for him. But something I'll even add to that, and I have a special soft spot for Red Sandcastle. I produced 2 shows there. But there are some disadvantages to using that space, and one of them is that for all of its up close and intimacy, it also has a very mildly raked audience, we could say. Yes. Or the auditorium, it does not rate very high. So there is, depending on where you're sitting, and we were in the 3rd row, which is the back row, it can kind of be hard to sort of see.
Yeah,
sight lines aren't always great. But what I will say is these 2 pieces were conceived perfectly to circumvent that issue, because at least with the puppet diorama format of Metamorphosis, you didn't have to, be able to see like people's faces are always kind of up close. There was, I found, at least since we were in the back row, I always had great sight lines of what was happening in the diorama itself. Yeah.
Yeah.
So kind of zooming everything into this contained small space really worked well against the difficulties that this space proposed. And then at the Mountains of Madness, he had this lecture, which was kind of him performing, and he had the big puppets and the little puppets, but this projector, the sort of overhead projector that in real time showed on the back wall, the cyclorama, what was happening on these like small images. That again really worked well, that no matter how far you were, and nothing is far in the space, but no matter how obstructed your vision might be, it was doing everything it can to really help the audience along against the conditions that might make the space more difficult. So I really did appreciate that. I will say, since you kind of went in with your complete and utter surprise at what these stories were, I will just to speak to my own relationship to these pieces. I love Kafka. I think, brilliant writer. I read the Metamorphosis. I read it as a teenager, so it's like been a little while, but to my recollection, like beat for beat, he got the story down. Like, because it's been a little while, I can't speak to the fact that, or whether or not the actual text, the extent to which it may or may not have been taken verbatim, but yeah, it certainly has all the memorable beats from the story, and really kind of just takes you through it in this fun way. And at the Mountains of Madness, I will say I've never read. So that one was, I kind of know it by reputation. Like H.P. Lovecraft, who I'm, okay, this isn't spoiler zone yet, but and there's nothing really spoilery about this, but he's a problematic figure who I'm guessing this company, being named Eldritch Theatre, probably has a special fondness for. Yeah, he was a terrible racist anti-Semite, kind of an Aryan New Englander who was afraid of his own shadow and everyone who was different from him, and kind of as a result of this sort of anxiety about the world he had, he created these classical horror stories about all the scary things in the world and beyond that might destroy you if you're not careful. So yeah, I will say I've read very little of his work because, well, it's one thing, like, you think of someone like J.K. Rowling, for example, who you grow up with her books, you love them, and then you find out she's a piece of shit, and you have to kind of grapple with, oh, this meant so much to me, and can I separate the artist from the art, et cetera, et cetera. And, I don't judge anyone for continuing to like the Harry Potter works, or if that did have a meaningful impact on them, even if they can recognize that the author maybe is not somebody who you want to be giving your money to. But someone like H.P. Lovecraft, who's been dead for 100 years now, I think, give or take, it's kind of, I have a hard time getting into an author who I already know to carry all this baggage with them. Finding out that your faves are problematic is one thing, choosing problematic faves is another altogether. So I've never really been able to get myself to get into Lovecraft. So I certainly, while knowing this particular novella by reputation and kind of understanding the gist and knowing the cosmic horror genre that, Lovecraft is more famous for inspiring than maybe any individual work that he's actually written, I was met with a lot of surprises in this one about the plot, even if it kind of met more or less the broad strokes. And I think while I will say, just as again, in the confines of non-spoileriness, I was much more pleased with the Metamorphosis, and I like them both, don't get me wrong, but I did find I maybe had a slightly less enjoyable experience with the Mountains of Madness. I think it still kind of brought all the same fun and whimsy, and was an excellent performance by a wonderful adapter and performer. And of course, puppetry is always fun, as is magic.
Yes.
Cool.
Yeah, no, I'll agree with you. I'll get more into it in our spoiler section, but I definitely will say simply that if I have my choice of which act did I prefer, Act 1 was my preferred act. Yeah.
Same. And for me, it also helped that this is a novella that I've read and love and think is really great. And yeah, there is this kind of palimpsestuous pleasure to seeing that portrayed in a truly fun and innovative way. But yeah, there are probably other reasons why I was maybe less favorable on the second half, but we'll get more into those in the spoiler. But yeah, all in all, I think these are wonderful performances. You get to see both for the price of a single ticket. So obviously, just because maybe we were slightly less keen on the second doesn't mean you should leave at intermission. Definitely not.
Oh, goodness, no.
I highly encourage people to see both because they're great, and you're obviously paying for both.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
That covers some general impressions. Should we put up spoiler shields for those who are watching on YouTube as opposed to podcast? We tend to put fun visuals on the screen for spoilers. Because we have two separate shows, I guess we're going to do two separate visuals for this.
All right.
So spoilers are up. Again, it is playing at the Red Sandcastle Theatre until June 5th. We highly encourage you to check it out. But if you don't want to be spoiled, now's your chance. Get out of here.
Get out of here. Come on back, though.
Yes, please do.
All right. Well, let's begin.
Yes. Okay, so now that the spoiler shields are up, before we get into the pieces individually, I don't know if you have things you wanted to say about the whole that you couldn't quite get into yet in the previous section.
It's more specific to each individual piece. I don't have a spoiler thing overall. I will say that I definitely, I mean, as I said, that Act 1 was my preferred act, and that was mainly because I felt the story was stronger in the first one. The second one, I felt dragged a bit more. It didn't quite grab me the same way. I was more invested in seeing what happened next to Gregor Samson, only to find out he dies.
Yep. Spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert. In a very unceremonial death. It's kind of like, and he's dead. It's like, oh, okay. All right.
That's the story.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I mean, like, do you have any general spoilery thoughts before we dive into individual one?
I think this kind of maybe does tie slightly with the individual, but I'll kind of say it now. Having not read At the Mountains of Madness, I was kind of thoroughly amused by this designer note that we have by Melanie McNeill, who was the designer. And she wrote here that, have you ever read At the Mountains of Madness? It is the most boring story, and it took me forever to finish reading. I could not understand why Eric was so keen on it. End quote. There's more to that, and obviously she came around to it eventually, but just the fact, like, again, it's not selling me on wanting to engage with the work of this author, who's also a bad person. But yeah, I think that, unfortunately, as dynamic and interesting as the performance was, and Eric obviously is, very good at making these pieces jump off the page and into the theatrical medium in like a fun way, I see the hints of that, bedrock.
It felt like we could have cut a few scenes. A few parts of the journey could have been a little bit more, streamed together versus kind of plodding along so much, because it didn't feel, I mean, Eric made it feel like the intensity was building, but the story itself really didn't lend to that anxiety building that I think Eric was giving. Eric was giving a lot of anxious energy about the dread and the terror. Yeah. And the story itself wasn't supporting him in that, where it's like, okay, I mean, as you know, in storytelling, when something is getting scary or intense, usually the pace of the story picks up, the action drives faster. But this was more like, let's stop and explain what happened. What's the story behind these weird drawings?
Stop and do a magic trick for like 5 minutes, which was all like very fun. And I think it's part of what made this show so fun. But it did kind of cut the tension at points, which made it sort of hard to keep building. And especially with a writer like Lovecraft, who kind of was all about atmosphere and creating a looming sense of dread. I don't feel like this piece captured that. And I'm not saying it has to. This isn't like it was unfaithful and therefore bad. That's not what I'm getting at here. But I do think that, in order for this story to really grip an audience, I do think you kind of have to keep that tension. And the magic tricks especially might have been working against it for that, even if I think that is more of the essence of what this piece is going for. And I'm not going to fault it for that. Yeah.
Yes. Well, I mean, the magic was used in that in Mountains of Madness to really kind of show this repetitive cycle that's come out of this Cthulhu Tukalili adventure that they had to this undiscovered part of the world, or lost part of the world. So I mean, I got thematically, I will say the magic for me made more sense in the second act than it did in the first. The first act the beginning part with the red balls coming out of him, that made sense because I was like, oh, it's his transformation into the bug. That's fine. But then it kept going on, like his eye popped out at one point, and all these balls kept coming out of him again. Yeah. So I mean, for me, like I would say, like in my personal opinion, I would actually trim a lot of the magic acts in Act 1, and I would just work to maybe be a little more pared down of the magic in Act 2, so it's on really key moments where you really need to do the card trick. Because I mean, every time bringing out the cards over and over again, after a while, it's like, okay, what other things are going on here? And I mean, the last trick is really cool, where he's able to pull out the statues and the objects there, and
the photo of the audience. Again, we're in spoiler zone. You knew this is coming. Exactly. Which is funny because the photo of the audience, that's one of the tricks that, like, it's obvious how he did it, because they clearly just took a photo of the audience, and then, you know, during Act 1, somebody printed it out, put it in the box, and then when they set it up for intermission, that's how it got there. Like, and I like, it's funny because that was like the big show-stopping trick, and I feel like that was sort of the most obvious one, which kind of, as like fun as it is, hey, that's us, it's also like a wop wop, very clever.
Yeah, for me, like, I think that trick would have worked more if that box had stayed on stage throughout both acts.
Yeah,
I mean that box never and just never open that box in Act 1. Just have it sitting in the back, center stage, not moved, not touched, and then like so basically the audience is always aware of that box, being like, well, what is that box? Yeah. It wasn't used from there, wasn't used there, because it's kind of also off to the side. Yeah, so it really didn't draw the attention in the intensity of like, what's in the box?
What's in the box? Cool.
You know, that type of thing there. So yeah, but I mean, like, yeah, Mountains of Madness, like, yeah, that was the story where I'm like, it started off really strong with a really interesting concept of this guy's gone on the adventure, he's now come back, and he's trying to convince people not to go on this tale. And I mean, like, it's funny, you and I were talking about over intermission about the TV show that the Terror with Kieran Hines, where it's all about Captain Sir John Franklin's lost expedition to the Arctic, and they get stuck up there and they get attacked and they disappear. And bodies are found frozen in the snow later, and it shows signs of cannibalism. But anyway, so it's funny how you and I were talking about lost expeditions during intermission, and sure enough, what happens in Act 2?
I don't recall what prompted us to get on that subject. It must have been we already saw the newspaper article that was put up during intermission. It wasn't a pure coincidence that we were talking about.
That's true. Yes, I'm talking about Batman because it's called the Arkham Times.
Yeah, just fun coincidence there, even that actually does come from the source material, which is funny.
Yes. But yeah. But yeah, no, like, that's a very good show to watch. And I mean, for me, like that, so when you started doing the tale, I was like, oh, it's going to be kind of like the Terror, where it's this ever imposing dread. And I think the bigger thematic thing was all about just how there are some mysteries in the world that are not meant to be discovered. Leave them alone. Don't always try to solve the mystery of science and that type of thing. Like, sometimes it's better just to go on faith and, you know, just kind of leave some things as it is. And I think that's a good lesson for today in the world, when we are pushing so fast with technology that sometimes humanity just doesn't have the ability to always keep up and regulate it properly. So I mean, I think the message in Act 2 was stronger in the sense of what's the story trying to say. Act 1 was more, it's a fun story about a guy who turns into a cockroach and then dies. Act 2 had the bigger message that I got out of it, which was, okay, fair enough. Like, there are things in the world we should leave alone and not try to decipher and try and figure out, and just let it be, you know. So I will say that is one of the stronger elements of Act 2 that I liked, was that there was a stronger message coming out of the pandemic and coming out of isolation, you know, and it's all about trying to discover things, trying to reclaim things. And it's like, no, some things are just meant to be what they are. Just let them be.
It's funny that you say coming out of the pandemic, because again,
they talk about it.
I love this. So this is the director's note from Mairi Babb, who, by the way, I recently saw. She's also a wonderful actor who was just in The Great Divide by Alex Sobler at the Harold Green Jewish Theatre. Just saw her in that excellent performance. And I believe I read somewhere that she was actually in the touring production of Warhorse. So clearly knows a thing or two about puppets, as this production shows. So yeah, she has this wonderful, and I will read this one in full because it's quite short and delightful. For me, Metamorphosis reflects the initial phase of the pandemic when we were all stuck at home and felt like gigantic bugs. Then we transition into the Mountains of Madness era, where people started to travel again and discovered it was a really bad idea. Thank you for coming. So I think, yeah, like this, and maybe gets to something that I was going to talk about later, but we might as well bring it up here since you've sort of gotten us on this topic.
Yes.
I think that's like the clear through line, like whether or not this was the intention of putting these two pieces in dialogue with each other through this anthology style performance. I think, yeah, that just creates a sense of where these pieces belong and what kind of dialogues are created by them. Because, yeah, I think they both kind of have this interesting pandemic feel to them, or, you know, they're the kind of things that we can sort of read differently now, having come out of the other side, hard to say, of a pandemic, that we wouldn't have necessarily thought of if we had read these stories before or seen this production before. That the pandemic will, and I think this will be a thing for a long time, always kind of create new layers of meaning that we attach to stories, and we're always going to have this sort of post-COVID lens that we apply to them. So, well, I think you said it's true that we kind of have this post-pandemic text or subtext that we can kind of put over top of At the Mountains of Madness. In the spirit of this director's note, kind of see the Metamorphosis as having the same thing. It's about what would it be like if, you know, you wake up one morning and your life is completely different. You are confined to your house, and you can't go about your business the way you used to. And I think also, again, to cite something in this lovely program, the designer of Metamorphosis, Lindsay Black, said something in here about overworking to the point of permanent injury, negotiating everything that chronic illness brings. It resonates with her personal experience. It's a little longer, and I don't have the exact quote easily extracted here. But yeah, I can understand like a disability reading of Kafka or something that kind of really relates to, you know, how does your life change when you are put in this situation where everything is different and you're no longer deemed a functional member of society who's able to produce capital, because that's actually what the story is really about. And
Gregor Samson can't provide for his parents who are coming out of debt, you know. And they even though he's been providing for them this whole time, the second they have to provide for him, it's suddenly too much of an inconvenience. And it is, I think there is this kind of idea about like disability, chronic illness, confinement, that really does like strike true, even more so now post-pandemic, which I think, really is like an interesting connective through line. Now, because each of these pieces was like about an hour long, I kind of picture if you were doing it at Fringe, each one of them can stand alone perfectly well, just fine. And like, this is where I was going to go later, but let's just talk about it now. I kind of would have maybe liked to see more of like a deliberate textual through line created maybe by like a framing device or some sort of, even if it's kind of just like a Rod Serling type Twilight Zone. Or like Tales from the Crypt, you know, like the Crypt Keeper kind of introducing these pieces as two weird tales. Like, so something like that might have been more interesting. Like, I'm not saying it's like, you know, not good that wasn't there. It sort of, you understand from the title that it is just two weird tales. So Act 1 is one tale, Act 2 is another tale, and he plays very different types of characters in both of them, especially in Act 2, where he is fully immersed in this character, whereas in Act 1, he doesn't really have like an external narrator function beyond breaking the frame to do these magic tricks, which I'll talk more about in a minute, since you already kind of talked about that a bit. But yeah, I would have maybe liked to see more of a deliberate framing of what do these two pieces have to say to each other, so it doesn't just feel like you attended two thematically related but otherwise sort of disparate Fringe shows. So that's very minor critique there, but I think I don't know if you, while we're on this topic, had more thoughts about putting these pieces together. Like I kind of said my piece about the magic, that once again Act 1 really I don't feel needed it overall. I think I think the piece would have been just as fine with just the opening ball trick and maybe one more later on. But like Act 2 did well with the magic, and I do agree. I do think there should have been a opening prologue, as it were, a Henry V type thing, or even have like a puppet in like an armchair, kind of doing an opening dialogue to the audience, where it's like attend the tale, the Balladeers of Sweeney Todd. There, just attend these two weird tales, that basically reflects me. Like, it would have been great if it was a frame device of somebody stuck at home during the pandemic.
Yeah, maybe it's
like sitting on a bed,
reading, and then kind of falling into these stories, maybe, and like kind of being shocked by the horror of how resonant they are. And how it might have been like a kind of I can see something like that. I don't know. Yeah, I feel like if something like that maybe would have required like 2 years later, like in between, to sort of speak to this temporality that
would have been great to pick up Act 2 with like him with this person sitting on a plane reading.
Yes, that would have been so fun.
Reading Mountains of Madness.
Yeah,
as they fly somewhere.
Yeah,
and then they get kicked off the plane because they're having a panic attack at the end.
Yeah, that could be fun. So yeah, I think there's definitely like more that could have been done in terms of establishing a frame that would be more of that explicit connection. But otherwise, I don't think it's it is exactly what the title says. It's two weird tales. Here's one, and here's the other. So I do want to talk about the magic tricks a little more, because
let's talk about magic.
So it's interesting because while I get where you're coming from with the magic could be cut in Metamorphosis, and yeah, I think it could be. I kind of liked the use of magic in Metamorphosis more than I liked it in At the Mountains of Madness, actually. And I liked it in both. Do not get me wrong on any of this, but to me, the use of magic in At the Mountains of Madness very much was just like it felt very tacked on, and it was kind of tacked on to both, but it felt tacked on, which I'm trying to kind of figure out how to articulate this, but it was much more seamlessly, I'll put in scare quotes, but it was woven into the narrative in a way that it wasn't in Metamorphosis. And I think that's interesting because in most cases, like with the magic, it kind of does like, we were talking about the tension and it sort of stops the plot dead. So now we can see a magic trick. But because this effort was clearly made to string it into the plot as if, the crazy things that our narrator experienced in Antarctica are all explained by the craziness of these magic tricks, it kind of, I feel like the fact that it did sort of stop the plot dead didn't necessarily play nicely with the fact that they were clearly woven into the plot. So what I liked about Metamorphosis significantly more is that it was very clear that we're taking a break from the plot because we're doing a magic trick, and there was no attempt to justify it as an extension of the story. But what it did do is it was, in my mind, justified as an extension of the tone and themes of the story.
Yeah, because, there's the coin one that he did, where the next sequence is all about money, right? Yeah,
it's all about money, but it's also about like the spots on his body. And every one of the magic tricks in Metamorphosis felt like it was organically inspired by the points of the story that we were at, but without the attempt of being like, this is the story, which was very much the tone of the magic in At the Mountains of Madness. So, and part of it, I think, kind of, while it might have been very fun at the end, if a bit of a headcanon here, if Eric had actually, as the puppeteer, transformed into some kind of insect himself, because that's what I felt like it was building towards, especially like with the clown noses coming out of his mouth and everything. Like it really felt like he was himself as the puppeteer going through the same more gradual but nonetheless horrifying transformation as Gregor Samsa. But then we didn't necessarily get that final culminative beat that kind of necessarily communicated the same. But to me, it still felt much more in the spirit of the story. Whereas the magic in At the Mountains of Madness was very much like, we're justifying that it is in the story, but it's kind of, we have to pause the story to do it. So, I think they were used in very different ways, but I could agree. I agree you could cut the magic from either, but I think this is a magic show. And what I do appreciate... Oh, sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
No. I'm disagreeing with you. Yeah, like I never want to cut the magic entirely. I just think there's a few of the sequences that maybe went on a little bit too long with the magic, like the eyeball sequence didn't quite get to me like the other ones where it's like, okay, what's the point of the eyeball magic that he did in that one? Like the coin one made sense, the opening one made sense. Like there's a few those segues in Metamorphosis that didn't quite hit their segue mark the same way. So
right.
Yeah.
The segues were definitely well handled in Epidemics of Madness, but they were segues to directing the audience towards pauses, whereas I didn't think the segues were even needed, like in Metamorphosis, because it's like, oh, the story's breaking because I too am transformed. It's a clown nose, like, and it was fun. It felt truer to the story that was being told. But what I will say, as just kind of one last sort of tying the ribbon on this point,
tie it up.
Reading Kafka is very funny. Like, Kafka is just a humorous writer. He's writing these horrific situations, but he has this very tongue-in-cheek way about it.
Yeah.
Lovecraft, who, again, I haven't read a lot of, but as I kind of understand him and his whole vibe, is dreadfully self-serious. So what I really, even if it was my least favorite of the two pieces we saw, I really love how unself-serious this performance was with this source material, especially in the Lovecraft half, because that just lends itself very naturally to Kafka in a way that it doesn't with Lovecraft. So while these like kind of interruptions for magic maybe feel like they broke the tension, I think that's part of the point, and I'll give it credit for that, because every time he's like, and to prove this eldritch horror ethereal magic that of the number 5 in the pentagram, I will prove it with a card trick. While it maybe doesn't build the tension like we were hoping, it deflates the tension in this kind of cheeky, hilarious way that I can't not like, because I think that's what it's going for. And maybe that is like, why Eric was so keen on it when this like really like dull drudge of a story, like, is this actually the thing that you want to do a comedy magic show about? And he found ways to I think punch back at this like mostly despicable person. So that's the thing. Adaptations don't need to have reverence for their source material. And I like how definitely Metamorphosis very clearly did have reference for source material, and it's great source material, so I'm happy that it did. But I kind of love the deflationary attitude that we have towards Lovecraft and his weird views about the horrors of the outside world.
I mean, like, I don't know what more I can say on that one, because I mean you were very succinct on it, where it's just, it makes total sense, because yes, I mean, Eric is very good at self-deprecating. Like I the fact that he was very quick on that one audience member who misread the paper in the second act and kept coming back to him. Like, he was very, even though,
and I feel like that was kind of must have been built into the script, because a little while later we had, in a part that needed to be very fast-paced, we had a painfully slow responding audience member.
Oh, so painful.
Yeah, and yet he didn't keep coming back to her. He kept coming back to the one who just mispronounced something earlier, which makes me think that might have been less improvisational than it felt. It felt very improvisational, but it kind of seemed the fact that he kept coming back to this guy who just misread something. I felt like there was a much easier target in the audience as far as the audience participation goes. I guess we should also say this might have been good for the non-spoiler zone, but there's audience participation in this, especially in Act 2. So if that's not your jam, sit in the far back row, because
where we did.
We were in the back row and we never got called upon. So if you're like me and you kind of turn red the second that you're like, oh no, there's audience participation, don't look at me, you're going to want to sit far back.
You're lucky you went with me, Ron, because I'm the same way. I'm sure if Jill had gone, she would have been having you right up in the front row to participate.
Sure. Yes, so, and like, there's nothing like, you're not going to be embarrassed by
no,
unless you are the one guy that he keeps, busting the chops of, but that's all in good fun. But like, so it's not like, humiliating audience participation, but if you'd rather avoid it altogether, we encourage you to sit in the back.
Yes. Well, are we ready for last thoughts?
I feel like we've kind of done like a good number on them. I'll let you go first if you have any summing up.
All right. I mean, last thoughts for me is, this is a really unique piece. I highly recommend getting out to see it. I thoroughly enjoyed myself watching it, even if there were elements that didn't quite jive. Overall, it's still a fantastic performance. I mean, anytime somebody can do a one-person show and captivate you for 2 hours, that is fantastic in my books. Like, that is most certainly a true to force performance there. Like, it didn't look like he was breaking a sweat doing it. Like, that's how cool and calm and just energetic the Eric is. So I would just say, for that alone, it's worth going to see it live. So for me, I go, yeah, absolutely. I highly recommend this piece. This piece certainly worked well for what it was doing. I think it really created a really unique piece that certainly introduces many audience members who may not be so familiar with these classic tales into a chance to really kind of explore them and see how they relate to the modern day. Like Eric was trying to do with the director and the designer, talking all about COVID and the pandemic and lockups and things like that. There is some really interesting material there that you can definitely sit on and chew afterwards. I think that's it for now.
Yeah, I don't have much more to add to that. It is a very wonderful piece. It's fun from beginning to end.
Yeah.
It is, anchored by an extraordinary performer and wonderfully designed puppets and sets and little gimmicks and doodads here and there that just make it all the more fun the sillier it gets. So I would honestly encourage anyone to go see this. And if you would like to make the trip out to Leslieville, it's playing at the Red Sandcastle Theatre until June 5th. So link for tickets will be in the description of this video and or podcast, depending on how you're consuming it.
Love it. Love it.
Okay. So
on that note, take us away.
It's time to sign off. So thank you for joining us in this horrifying journey through these two weird tales. And now we're going to transform. Yes, I will say thank you for joining us. If you liked this, please like, share, and subscribe on YouTube or the podcast platform of your choosing. Give us a review, write something in the comments. We'd love to hear from you.
Yes, we would.
You can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at COH Theater on all platforms.
Interact with us. Give us your thoughts. Like, we'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, we'd love to hear what everything you had to say. Did you like one tale more than the other? Did you think they were both equally good? What was your thoughts on the magic? Have you also been transformed into some kind of insect? And
are you now endured to a cockroach?
Yes. Let us hear from you. We want to hear all about your crazy misadventures.
Yes.
How about you, Mac? Where can people find and follow you?
Well, you can find and follow me at Mackenzie Horn on all social media platforms. When this video comes out, as well as this podcast comes out on a Monday, we will have just released our season 4 finale episode of my other work, which is Before the Deputy Musical Podcast, where we talked all about the musical Grease. And Jill herself even makes a brief audio cameo where she got to share her thoughts on the show as well as a guest audio inputter. So there you go. So yeah, definitely, if you're a fan of John Travolta, Olivia Newton-John, all that great Ram-a-lam-a-lam-a dinky-dongs, come on and check it out. Tell me more. Sandy, all that good stuff. Definitely take a look and check it out. Yeah, so that's it there. There's a lot of good stuff from that season. Jill's on there in Avenue Q. We do our big 50th episode about Phantom of the Opera, and then we wrap up the season with Grease. And there's a lot of good stuff in between. So definitely take a gander, check it out. It's a fun bit of conversation we have in there.
Lovely.
Yeah, Ryan, give us your classic send-off.
I'm not easy to find on social media, but if you do find me, you could follow me. I don't care. But I literally don't post anything, at least on Facebook. The one I actually do use, all I do is just post these episodes when they're new. So you might as well just follow Cup of Hemlock instead. Again, that's COH Theater on all platforms. If you follow me on Instagram, I've literally never posted anything.
That is true.
So, yes. So thank you once again for joining us, and we hope you enjoy those two weird tales.
Thank you, and have a great rest of your day. Stay healthy and stay safe.
Yeah, happy non-Halloween in the summer.
Happy Halloween. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.